to do. Put a note in the chat, okay? So today we're going to be talking about authentic content, getting real about authentic content. I'll do my best to give you some real advice, some real suggestions, some real strategies for using authentic content effectively. We'll be covering three things in today's session. The first one is we'll be talking about what is authentic content. I'll try and give you some suggestions as to what exactly that is. We'll talk about why authentic content is useful. And in the final part, where I'll spend most of the time, we'll talk about how we can use authentic content effectively. And I'll try and give you some strategies, some practical teaching strategies that will allow you to use authentic content. So let's move on. What is authentic content? And I'm going to start by asking you to tell me what you think. Could you type in the chat box and tell me what you think authentic content is? So we've got some interesting ideas. Many of you are saying authentic content is real life materials, or it's written by native speakers of English. It's material that's been designed for native speakers of English, those kinds of things. And of course, you're right. Authentic content is everywhere. And I'm going to make a distinction between authentic content and authentic materials. When I talk about authentic content, I'm specifically describing material that is based on real language, real information, real ideas, but it may be adapted for level or content. So for example, you may have something based on real information, but it's been written at a B1 level, or it's real information, but some of the stuff's been taken out to make it a little bit more accessible or comfortable for students. And then there's authentic material, and this is something that's not been adapted at all. We can use it for English language teaching classes, but it wasn't intended for that purpose. Now, this distinction is, of course, a little bit artificial. Sometimes the material is the same, sometimes they're different. So when I talk about authentic content, I mean both material that has been adapted or authentic material that hasn't been adapted. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about today, both of these types of authentic content. And what are some examples of authentic content? Well, there's too many, of course, too many to discuss, but I'll share a few of the obvious ones with you today, just quickly. Of course, we can find articles. These could be articles from newspapers, they could be articles from websites. We're living in a great time for this kind of material. We've got other things. If we wanted reading, we could use blog posts or online posts. Here's a blog post written by me, I think, actually. Thank you, Emily. Related to critical thinking, which is a webinar I did about a month ago. And we can use this kind of content either adapted or as it is. We can use audio materials. Podcasts are widely available and very, very useful. We've got similar audio material. We can use lectures. One of the great things these days is the ability to access lectures by professors at universities like Harvard, MIT, Yale, and so on. I'll just type in a website, www.openculture.com. This is a website that has a list of all the lectures that are available from famous professors at big universities. And we can find maybe something for our students from there. If we move on, then we've got something like, we're still talking about listening. We can use music as a source of authentic content, either to inspire emotions or for the lyrics of the music, anything like that. We can use infographics. These days, because of the internet, there's visual information is becoming very, very important. It's everywhere now. So infographics are things that we can use as a source of information for teaching. Slightly different, but similar. We've got illustrations. And again, there's a lot of information that we can use here to teach our students. Of course, we can use photographs. Here's a meta photograph, a photograph of photographs. And there's, again, a lot we can do. Visual literacy is very important. And maybe anything else? We've talked about some examples of authentic content. Maybe in the chat box you could share some other examples if you think of anything that I haven't mentioned yet. So lots of good suggestions. The one that's coming up most often is some kind of video material, and of course you're right, I deliberately didn't mention that, but video is something that we can definitely use. It's so much video content on the web that we can grab some great material. And I'm going to actually show you a video now. Here's a video that we used in the Pathways series, and I think it's something very, very nice. This is actually authentic material. It hasn't been adapted in any way. Let's watch.
I have run these canyons for 6 million years. I have traveled from the Rocky Mountains to the deserts, through scorching heat and freezing cold, from the land of the dinosaurs to fields of food.
I lend my hand to 7 states, 2 countries, 9 national parks,
and 36 million people across an arid West.
I am not the strongest or the largest, but I am the hardest working.
People love me.
My playfulness,
My beauty.
my power,
My life. But I don't think I can offer any more.
I am
I am tired,
tapped,
and tied. Of the hundreds of major rivers in the world, I am one of the few who no longer kisses the sea.
Battles to harness my soul have been won and lost. Use me wisely, and I will sustain you.
Use me like you have, and I will break. My name
is
is Red. The Grand River Red. The American Nile.
The Canyon Maker. I am the Colorado River.
And I am the most endangered river in America.
So that was a video called I Am Red. The title itself is an interesting one for me. I couldn't understand why they'd called it that because I don't speak Spanish. But of course, Colorado, the name of the river, means something like colored red in Spanish, I believe. So kind of an interesting one. If we move on, we've got videos. And I'm going to ask your opinion. Could you use that video with your students? What do you think? Maybe you could answer the poll when Emily has a chance to bring it up for us. So very interesting. The majority of people are saying that, yep, this is great content. It's at a good level. So I think we all agree that it is a very nice video to watch, and there's a lot in it. It's quite a short video, which makes it nice to use in the classroom. There are words, quite high level, some of them, but because there aren't that many words and because they're spoken quite slowly, I think we could perhaps use it. So it looked like almost all of you would think that yes, you could probably use it. So great. That's the kind of authentic content that I think we could use very nicely. Let's move on. Now that we've understood what authentic content is, why is it useful? Let's have a discussion about some of these things. To begin this section, I'm going to talk about 3 problems that I think we as teachers might have encountered in the classroom. And one of them is something that I call the real world problem. And there's a paradox I've felt for many years, that when we are great teachers, when we use great material, we help our students a lot. We teach them the language that they need to know. The problem is, when we teach so well using material that's at the perfect level, it's not what's going to happen when they're outside the classroom. If we teach them something inside the classroom and then they go outside and find that their language doesn't work, it can be a real problem. I spent some time teaching in Japan, and that was a problem for me, is that I'd learned some Japanese in the classroom and I was able to get great grades. And then I go outside the classroom and people look at me like I'm crazy when I try to speak Japanese and they don't understand me. And it was a very frustrating experience. So this is the real world problem. And if we look at how it might work in practice, we've got a situation like this. There's a student who says, "Excuse me, how much this is, please?" And then the native speaker working in the shop says, "Oh, it's just been marked down to $2 or 3 for 5, okay?" And the student says, "Thank you." And the person says, "You're welcome." But this is really what the student's thinking. Did she understand? It's just been marked down. Phrasal verb might be difficult. To $2, does she know the word bucks? It's idiomatic English. Possibly she does, maybe she doesn't. Does she understand 3 for 5? Three what? 5 what? That's again a very colloquial expression that perhaps the student is not going to be familiar with. So we've got this real world problem. The way we teach, and of course that's our job, is to teach and help our students to understand perfectly in the classroom. But is the material going to help them outside the classroom? And if not, then perhaps we're not doing the best job we could for our students. There's also what I'm going to call the parsnip problem that language classrooms sometimes have. And the parsnip problem is that the material we use, the textbooks we use, have been designed, very carefully designed and carefully chosen topics so that there's nothing controversial, there's nothing upsetting. And we all understand why. We don't want to upset our students. We don't want to lose students because we're talking about things that are going to upset them. but the real world is full of controversial, upsetting topics, right? So again, we're perhaps not providing the best quality for our students if we're not using these topics. What are these parsnip topics? Politics is the first P. Alcohol. You'll very rarely find references to alcohol in any English language teaching materials. Religion. Most books try to avoid references, any kind of reference to religion. Sexuality, narcotics, isms, racism, sexism, ageism. Pork. The certain markets are very big, and those markets, people tend not to eat pork. So pork is a sort of forbidden topic. But of course, it's not just these. I'm sure you can think of other topics that might not be put into books. But the real world is these topics that are out there. And maybe we're not helping our students as much as we could if we're not using those topics. And these days, it's hard to avoid hearing this expression "fake news" these days. There's a fake news problem. The internet, computers have given us these tools that can create content, amazing content, pretty easily, pretty quickly. And as a result, it can be hard to know what to believe, who to believe. So this is another problem that we might experience when we're teaching. For example, true or false, type in the chat box. This is an award-winning National Geographic photo. Yes or no, true or false? So it seems to be kind of an interesting mix of true or false. Some of you saying yes, it is. Some of you saying no, it's not. The answer? False. It's been heavily photoshopped. In fact, as I understand it, this is a composite of 3 different pictures that have been merged together using Photoshop. But it was an interesting one because this was actually something that was viral on Twitter a couple of years ago. Somebody posted this photo on Twitter and said he was a National Geographic photographer, and this was his award-winning photo. And none of that was true. He isn't a National Geographic photographer. This didn't win an award. But yet he was able to make it, and it became viral. So this is the kind of thing that we can say as a problem, a kind of fake news problem. And I don't know, the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, what an amazing photo. And then when I knew it was fake, I was like, oh, maybe the water, maybe there's something about that. I don't know. It's so hard to know. So which of these problems have you encountered, or your students? Tell me which ones. So we've got some interesting results. It looks like the real world problem is definitely something that we've all experienced. And yeah, I mean, that's, I think, what we would expect. It really is a challenge for our students, often a challenge for us as well if we're going to a foreign country. The parsnip problem, it's there. About a quarter of you have experienced it. The fake news problem as well. So let's see how authentic content can help us with these problems. Because I think it can. I think it can help to negate the real world problem, the parsnip problem, and the fake news problem. For one thing, authentic content has more authentic language than is often found in English language teaching materials. I write a lot of books these days, and I'm always being very careful to grade my language to make it exactly at B1 or B2, for example. And that means that necessarily I have to reduce certain expressions that wouldn't match with that level. but authentic content can give us that authentic language in an authentic context, and that is very useful. Authentic content can address more mature topics, possibly more controversial topics, and because it's real material, it can allow students to feel comfortable talking about that more than if it were something imagined. And then, of course, authentic content is, by definition, it's factual, it's not fictional. So let's look at an example of some material. This is from the Pathways series, and we've got here a book, a page from a book, a reading passage, and it's about a real person, a woman called Sasha Martin, who writes a real blog on the internet that students could actually go and look at if they wanted to. And if you look at the blue words on this page, these are the typical vocabulary words that we would expect in a textbook. We've got words like popular, dishes, ingredients, hope, arguing, respect, and recipes. Clearly this is a unit related to food, and these are the words that we might expect. But there's a little bit more going on. Because it's real language, real content, we've got a nice collocation like this one. Her plan was simple. A simple plan is a common expression that we would use because plan and simple often collocate. We've got more idiomatic, more figurative language here. The phrase armchair travel. Now, students are unlikely to have heard this before, and it's certainly not something that we would necessarily expect them to be able to say, but it's a very nice example of the figurative language that we use all the time. Armchair travel, of course, being you sit in a chair, but you still get to travel the world. And on the next sentence below, it says stovetop travel, which is a sort of a play on the words. And then we've got references to the things that our students do every day, things like Facebook and blog posts. So authentic content here is showing us some things that we can bring out to help our students a little bit more to access things that are in the real world, the kind of language that we can expect. So the language is more authentic. And then we've got this, more mature topics. A very powerful photograph of a dead gorilla killed by hunters, by poachers. And this is not necessarily the kind of content that you would expect to get in an English language textbook, but it's authentic content. Again, this comes from the Pathways series. And this one doesn't shy away from saying, look, this is something that humans did. We are responsible for this. And this photo is one that created a sort of a viral outrage. People were very upset to see this photograph. It really got people thinking about how can we protect gorillas. And this unit goes on to say not just that humans did it, but suggests some ways that perhaps humans can do better, that we can avoid hurting the animals that share our planet with us. It's not a nice photo to look at, of course, but it generates discussion, it generates some interesting topics, and I think that can be very helpful for our students. And then we've got here another example from a Pathways book about a day on planet Earth. And I don't know if any of you have seen this documentary. It's called Life in a Day. And essentially what happened was the filmmakers got video from thousands of people all around the world and stitched it together to make a documentary about what would happen in a single day on Earth. And let's have a quick look at the trailer.
Good morning, everyone.
Hola.
I love life.
I really love my family.
I love football.
Do you both promise to love and treasure each other?
We do.
I'm afraid of losing this place.
I fear
any kind of monster.
dogs. Growing up.
Politics scares me more than anything.
Stay safe.
When I close my eyes, I can see all different people in the world. I can feel it, I can touch it, I can see it.
Best day ever.
So this is the unit in the book that's based on this video. The video is actually available on YouTube to watch for free. I don't know if it's legally available on YouTube, but it's there. And certainly very interesting because it's user-created content, the kind of thing that perhaps our students could be doing, perhaps our students are doing. So this is definitely an example of factual, not fictional content. And for me, at least, that kind of thing is often more motivating, more interesting, because it is real and based on real people, real ideas. In addition to negating those problems of the real world problem, the parsnip problem, and the sort of fake news problem, I think there are some other benefits of using authentic content. As I just said, it's interesting and motivating. It can really practice key 21st century skills, and it can focus on real academic issues. So if you're teaching academic classes, it's automatically sort of built in. So again, let's have a look at some of these examples. Here's a page from Pathways about what happens if humans need to move to Mars. Is this going to happen? How would it be? So, and for me at least, an interesting and motivating topic, and coupled with the sort of great videos, the great visuals that National Geographic is known for. I think this is hopefully very interesting for students. Here's another page. We've got what look like fairly simple exercises here. We've got a summarizing activity. This is a very, very useful 21st century skill, a very useful skill regardless of the century probably. So fairly straightforward. We've got a typical exercise, understanding details. But notice how this understanding details question is based on this illustration. So it requires a little bit of visual literacy, and that I think is something that's very useful for students. It's also an exercise type that's very common in the IELTS exam, and that perhaps might be useful for students as well. And then a third task, which is a critical thinking task, in this case getting students to analyze or categorize perhaps. And students are here being asked to decide if something is a fact or if it's speculation. So again, perhaps getting into that idea of, is it fake news or is it real? So I think this is kind of useful stuff for students to look at. So key 21st century skills. And then real academic issues. The psychology of supermarkets. The internet has disrupted many aspects of our daily lives, and one of the biggest ones is perhaps this whole idea of shopping. How do we shop? The internet has had a really big impact on how people shop, and as a result of that, many businesses are going out of business. So there's a lot of research going on these days into the science behind shopping, how to persuade people to buy things, how to persuade people to spend more money. And so this is actually a very cutting edge topic, the psychology of supermarkets, of what's going on. So authentic content is the kind of thing that we can share with our students to help them get used to understanding these topics, to discussing these ideas. Now, of course, it's in a book, so it has been filtered, it has been, we've tried to find the right level, but the underlying content is still authentic and still gives us these benefits. So we've talked about some benefits. We've talked about solving issues like the real world problem. We've talked about providing interesting and motivating content, practicing key 21st century skills and literacies, and focusing on real academic topics and issues. Which ones are most interesting for you? Please share. Emily will bring up the poll. Okay, so interesting comments. The real world problem is more than half of you. Interesting and motivating content, of course, right? I mean, as teachers, that's what we want. That's what our students want. So definitely, because authentic content can give us those things, it's useful. So let's move on then to the final part. How can we use authentic content effectively? Because there are challenges. Authentic content is useful, it's valuable, but there are potential challenges in using it. For one thing, it's going to be difficult. Now, if we remember back to the beginning of the webinar, we talked about authentic content and authentic materials. Authentic content is authentic material that's been written at a specific level. And I know that we as teachers will try to do that. We'll try to write our own material, but it takes a lot of time. So sometimes we have to use authentic material that hasn't been adapted for the level. And of course, as a result, that material is going to be difficult for our students. Some of the material is very long. If we've got a video that's 20 minutes, that may be too long to show. Some of the material is going to be controversial. It's going to have these ideas that although we may need to talk about them, although we may want to talk about them, we may be uncomfortable, we may not be allowed because of our classroom situation. So that's something that I think we could say is a problem. There are ways to solve these problems though. Students may find authentic content can be difficult, so how can we help? What I'm showing you here are 3 websites that give us something very valuable as teachers. Text Inspector, Readable.io, and Vocab Kitchen. These websites all allow us to find a CEFA profile. That's the Common European Framework of Reference. You know, A2, B1, B2, C1, and so on. These websites will allow you to copy some text, whether it's a reading passage or a listening script, and find out the level. Let's have a look at one of these. So they can help us to choose material that's at the right level for our students. Text Inspector is the one that I recommend most. Fantastic website. Unfortunately, you need to have a subscription to get the most from it. But I'll show you what you can do. If you've copied in some material, maybe a script from a video, for example, then Text Inspector will be able to show you that this is at C1 plus level. If you're teaching an intermediate level group, that's perhaps a B1, you're going to be thinking, okay, look, this material is going to be pretty difficult for my students, so I'm going to find another video. Now, of course, as experienced teachers, we know that automatically, but I find it very useful to be able to get a sense of the actual level, and Text Inspector can do more. It can actually show you the vocabulary that is at that C1 level or C2 level. And that will help you to recognize, very quickly, okay, these are going to be the problem words, so this is something that I might need to look at. In addition to choosing material that's at the right level, we can actually slow things down. VLC is a video player. It also plays audio. It's available for free. It's available for every platform, so it's Windows, it's Mac, it's even Linux. And on the website, on the desktop, you've got an option to slow things down. So all you would do is you've got the video, you're playing the video, you go to playback, you choose speed, and you choose the option that says slower. Right here. And on the fly, it slows it down. Now this sounds fantastic, but of course you may be thinking, people will sound like this. But the great thing is that the technology is so good that it doesn't do that. It just slows it down, but it doesn't change the pitch of the voice. So you can actually use this very effectively. So if you've got a video that you think is, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, you can do this. YouTube has this kind of capability automatically. And if I go back, there's one here called Video Speed Controller, which is an extension for Chrome. And this gives you the opportunity to use any video. If you're watching within the Chrome browser, you can slow down or speed up any video at all. So very, very useful. Now, I only use Chrome, so I don't know, but I'm sure there are extensions for other browsers like Firefox and so on. So if you've got material that you think is great, audio material, a lecture or a video, slow it down, see if that helps. And if you've got a group of students who are really annoying you, speed it up and stop them from doing that. I'm joking. But I used to teach a lot of exam classes, and one of the things I would do is I would speed up everything. Whatever the listening content was, I would make it 10% faster. And at the beginning, my students look like this. They're shocked. They can't believe how fast it is. And then after a while, they began to get familiar with this speed. It became the new normal for them. They began to understand better. And then they would take the test, IELTS or TOEFL, and they would come back and they would say, the listening section was easy. I understood everything. I had so much time. And because actually they did have so much time, the speed of the test was slower than they were used to. So they were able to understand more. They were able to not just use their brain to understand what's being said. They're able to think about it and to choose the answers effectively. So this is, a little bit of a joke, but actually a very useful trick if we wanted to help our students. And then still on this subject of how can we make authentic content slightly easier for our students. Here is, of course, a simple page from Wikipedia. And one of the things that I've done is I like to act as a tour guide when I'm teaching some material to students. When we go on holiday, a tour guide is the person who can show us around and give us the sort of background information that puts things in context. So a tour guide might say, look, over here you'll see this building, and this was built by this person 500 years ago, and we used it for this, and then it was used for this. And that's the kind of thing that can help us to understand something. As teachers, we can act as a sort of a language tour guide, a cultural tour guide. So we can show students a video, and we can pause the video, and we can say, look, the person just said this. This is what it means. This is why the person said it. This is what the person wants us to understand. And that kind of tour guide-like mentality can be very, very helpful for our students to understand things. I like to also give the students control. I say to them that they are the remote control. They say pause, and I will pause the video, and then they have to ask me a question. So now it's getting language from the students. The students will say something like, the speaker just said blah, blah, blah. What does that mean? Or I just heard this word. I'm not sure if I understand that. Or why did the person say this? Because I thought he was talking about something else. And this allows me to give them some ideas based on what they're thinking rather than what I think is important. And every single time I've done this, like literally every time, and 100% of times, students will ask questions that I'd never thought of. I didn't imagine that this would be something interesting for them or problematic for them. So as a teacher, I think I've become better informed about the kinds of things that students are likely to ask about, and that helps me to give them more useful advice, more useful knowledge. And then while we're talking about Wikipedia, I wanted to show you something. I'm sure you all know that Wikipedia has many, many languages. So the website, a different article can be done in a number of languages. But one of the languages is what they call Simple English. The Simple English page is one that gives a slightly simpler approach or a slightly simpler language for the topic. And this can be a very effective way to get students some background knowledge on a topic. Now, we need to be a little bit careful. As far as I can see, the Simple English page is not written by English language teaching professionals. So it may not be as simple as we would like, but that's great because it's still authentic language. We're still overcoming that real world problem. And in most cases, it is simpler than the normal English page. So we've got this option to give our students this ability to use Wikipedia using the Simple English page, and then perhaps to move on to the regular page to give more advanced knowledge. We can even do it in 3 ways. For their homework, they use their language to get the background knowledge. Then they use Simple English first to connect what they've learned in their language with what they've seen in English. And then finally, we use the regular English page to sort of build up to something higher. So this nice 3-step approach that will help our students to understand authentic content. Not every article has a Simple English page, and I have seen a few where the Simple English page was much more difficult than the regular page. But in general, it allows us this option. So it's a nice little trick if we can do it. So what about material that's too long? Well, if we've got material that's really long, I mean, very simple. I'm probably not telling you something you haven't thought of, but we can use it over a longer period. Projects, task-based learning, project-based learning is very, very big these days. So let's take a piece of long, authentic content and let's use it over a longer period. We can break it down. We can do this. We can do that. We can also use our students. We can break something into chunks. We can give a group of students, you're going to watch the first 5 minutes, you're going to watch the second 5 minutes, and so on. You watch your 5 minutes chunk, summarize it for the rest of the class. Let's look at vocabulary. Okay, you guys are focusing on nouns, you guys are focusing on verbs, you guys are adjectives. Share what you've learned. We're forcing students to look at the language to recognize part of speech. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? They're having to go in there and look at the language and explain it to our students. We don't have to use long content. Why not use very short content? Here's a very interesting headline. How the arrival of electric cars could hurt the beverage industry. We don't need to read the article necessarily. We can get a huge amount of discussion just out of this newspaper headline. How could electric cars hurt the beverage industry? Excuse me. That doesn't seem on the surface like something that is an obvious connection. So there's a lot of discussion that could be generated just from this one newspaper headline. If you're interested, apparently, if there are electric cars, fewer people are going to stop at convenience stores to buy beverages. I'm not sure I necessarily agree, but I think that's the general gist. Okay. One type of authentic content that I love to use in my classrooms is these sort of inspirational photographs with an inspirational quotation. So here's a famous quotation I'm sure you've heard before. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And we've got this photograph and we can ask questions, how does this quotation match with the photograph? Do you think that quotation is true? Does it only apply to journeys? Does it apply to something else? So again, quite a lot of interesting and useful content, interesting, useful discussion that we can generate with a very, very short piece of authentic content that is something we can look at very nicely. And then another website that some of you may know, some of you may not. There's a site called Blinkist. And what Blinkist does is they take non-fiction books and they will summarize them in a series of what they call blinks. Blinks in this case just means pages. So we've got a non-fiction book, maybe 300 pages, and it's shortened down into 14 summary pages. It's still a lot of content, but 14 pages is much easier than 300. And some of these ideas are fantastic. I first got to know Blinkist because I was doing some research for one of the books I was writing about the science of shopping. And I came across this summary of a book called The Science of Shopping by a writer called Paco Underhill. And I'd lost my copy of the book. So I found Blinkist and it was like, wow, this is great. I still don't have much time, but at least I can feel that I'm reading a few books. So perhaps a useful thing, and Blinkist probably is a paid site, but there are other sites like that, I'm sure. So we can just use shorter content if it's going to be too long. And then we've got this problem is that some of the ideas are going to be controversial. Some of the things are going to be provocative. Some of the things are stuff that we perhaps don't want to or are not allowed to talk about. So here are two programs. One is called Audacity and one is called VLMC. Audacity is an audio editing software. Again, it's multi-platform, so Windows, Mac, Linux, and so on. And VLMC, Videoland Media Creator, Movie Creator, something like that, by the same people that make the VLC software that I showed you earlier that you can slow down videos. This one can edit the videos. So you can edit the content. Now, you might need some technical skills for this, but I don't have many technical skills and I've been using Audacity for years. It's very, very simple, very straightforward. If you are going to edit, you need to be looking into the content permission issues. You may not have permission to actually edit the content. That's for you to decide. And this is what Audacity looks like. At the bottom there, you can see the sound wave, and you can do editing techniques. If you don't want to edit it, you can just use a very short part of it, an excerpt from it, to avoid the situation of playing something that isn't what you want to hear. And if we go back to the TED Talks, which I know are a great resource that many of you have used, TED has these interactive transcripts, which are fantastic. It means you're looking at the transcript of what the speaker is saying, and if you click on the words in the transcript, it will jump you to that section of the talk. So you can know where to jump, and you can just watch a few excerpts from the video very, very easily. What else can we do if the content is controversial or problematic for us? Well, here's a picture of a sandbox, and you can make your class a sandbox. This is an idea from computers. If you've got a computer and you're downloading something from the internet, you're not sure whether this is safe software. So computer engineers will create a sandbox, which is basically a computer within the computer. And anything that runs within this sandbox is safe. Even if it's a virus, even if it's dangerous, it doesn't get outside of that computer inside the computer. And because of that, you can't damage your whole computer. So this is an idea that I think we can copy in our classrooms and say, look, today we're going to be talking about people killing gorillas, or the drug trade, or something else that's a controversial topic. And you say, but we're doing this in a sandbox, so this is a safe space. We're using this sandbox to discuss this topic. It may not work in your classroom situation. It may not work with every student, and you need to be, of course, creating a space that everybody feels comfortable with. But as an idea, I think students are often, they would like to talk about these topics. And by saying it's a sandbox, you've created a space where this kind of discussion could be more comfortable, more possible. So I've talked about a lot of different ways that we can use authentic content effectively. We can use websites like Text Inspector that can help us to judge the level of a particular piece of text or a script. We can slow the material down using YouTube itself, or a software like VLC, or within Chrome. We can act as a tour guide for material. We can use simple English. We can use shorter kinds of authentic content if we wanted to. We can edit the content if we've got permission, and we can make our class a sandbox. So which ones of these are going to be useful for you? Which one would you think you're going to try? All right, so it looks like choosing material at the right level, slowing material down, acting as a tour guide over a period, and different kinds, shorter kinds of authentic content. Those are the ones that are particularly useful. Great, I'm glad. We've got just a couple more slides before we go. Final thoughts. As we've been saying, authentic content, huge number of varieties, so many different kinds of authentic content. Remember, by authentic content, we mean material that has been adapted in a textbook, or material that's authentic, material that we haven't adapted that we're using. And there's many benefits of using both of these kinds of content. They can negate problems like the real world problem. They can add interest to our classes. They can add value. There are challenges to using authentic content in the classroom, but I've given you, I hope, some suggestions or solutions to how we can overcome these challenges, and I'm sure that you have many more ideas of your own as to how we could overcome those. So I hope it'll be useful for you. Thank you very much. All of the images and examples that I showed today came from the Pathways 2nd edition series. Okay, so it's out now. Please have a look. And if you're interested, if you have any questions for me, feel free to send me an email at ngl.webinars@cengage.com. This will come to me after it's been gone through the NGL team. All right. And if you are interested, I did a webinar about a month ago on critical thinking. The recording is available online. If you wanted to have a look at that, that would be great. I do warn you though, the jokes are the same. I've only got 3 jokes. I use them all the time. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Christian, and thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found this webinar useful and have some new tips to bring to your classroom. Just a few final concluding thoughts here. We do have more webinars. We'll be featuring another one that has to do with pathways later this month. You can find out about those on ngl.cengage.com/webinars. And then we'd love for you to follow our InFocus blog for teachers of English. The link is right here too. And Christian does have a post on there that you can check out about his last webinar. And just finally, you can download the certificate of attendance down here in the bottom left corner. And if you're having any problems downloading it, we do email it to you after, along with a recording of the session and the slides as well. So just stay tuned for that. And last but not least, at the end of the webinar, right now you'll be directed to a survey just to hear your feedback on the session. So we'd love to hear what you have to say. So please just stick around for that. And I hope you all have a great weekend.